Hey everybody, so welcome back to another episode, and this week we are going to we're going to geek out about the new M3 and M4, the 5th generation M3 and 1st generation M4, I think, depends on how we want to call it. Anyway, I drove the M3 back in early June, and then in Road America, my first time there, which was great, and then spent the next couple days driving it back to Los Angeles. And let me tell you, if there's a good way to learn about a car, it's to drive it around a great racetrack for a day and then spend 2,000 miles in it driving it back to Los Angeles. So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of the M3 and consequently the M4. And so without further ado, let's get started. This is the presentation we got at the launch itself. It's kind of light in some details, unfortunately, and I'll try to fill it in as good as I can. I was able to get some good info out of the BMW people about this car, what makes it tick, and let's just dive into it. They had basically all the cars that you see here, with the exception of the M1, at the event, which is great to see. It's really cool to see these cars progress. Just interesting to see how they grow and modernize themselves. The new M3 and M4 are pretty big, but as we'll get into here, I guess we first talk about the previous generations. I've had the good fortune, rather the incredible fortune, let's say, of driving all 4 M3s back to back. Did that last year, 2 years ago. We had an E30, an E36 lightweight, which was very cool. A E46 and an E92, what was that, especially the Lime Rock edition, which was basically all the M accessories attached onto it. And I got to spend 2 days driving them on a closed course. Didn't get to push a lot of the older ones hard, but got to get a really good understanding of how they behave and what makes them special. Now, the US kind of got slighted with the first 2 generations of M3s. We never got like the Sport Evo E30 and our E36 M3. We didn't get the more powerful version. We didn't get the one with the sophisticated head, so we never got all the power. Still, I mean, the cars have amassed such a following, and they sell more and more and more of them every year, and each one is just good in its own way. This is just illustrating some of the firsts that the M3s brought to the market, and the big deals, or the big deal for each one of them. And, you know, picking a favorite out of the group is tough. I don't know if we even should get into it. E30s right now are just so overpriced. They're really fun cars, but you really got to beat on them to have fun with them. My favorite out of driving the 4 that day, considering value and all that, had to have been the E46, because that felt like a proper big boy car. They're not exceedingly valuable right now, and that was a really nice one to drive. But the E90 and the E92 were great as well. They're just quite a bit of money still. Maybe the values will drop because the new generation is out. Anyway, too much digression. The 5th generation car. Now, there's a lot of really interesting things happening with the 5th generation car because it represents kind of a turning point for the M division. This is the first M3 with a turbocharged engine, and it's the biggest M3 yet. You know, they've done turbos in the X5, the X6M, the M5, and the 1 Series M. So, you know, turbos, I mean, we should know by now that turbos will be coming, but it was still kind of a shock to, you know, drive this car for the first time with turbos. The big difference, though, is torque. So this chart at the bottom right here is comparing basically the torque and horsepower throughout the years, and you can see, you know, how it's climbed. Conveniently, they've done the US 240 horse instead of the 260 I think the European model made, but you can see that, you know, the V8 made no torque. The E92 engine made no torque whatsoever. It was fine, it just was not a lot. Now we have a dramatic increase in torque thanks to those turbos. Despite being bigger in every dimension than the cars it's replacing, the M3 sedan and coupe, the M3 and the M4, it's always going to be a pain to refer to it as M4, it's lighter. They really concentrated on trying to reduce weight as much as possible. If I recall correctly, their target was E46, and I think it's actually ultimately ended up being closer to E90, E92 M3, but it's still cool to see that they've paid a lot of attention to lightweight stuff, which is great. Here we get into some of the big bullet points on the engine. It's a twin turbo straight 6. designated S55 in BMW speak. It's a 3-liter, red lines at about 7,500 RPM, and again has 2 turbos hanging off the side of it. Some of the interesting points is it doesn't have cylinder liners. It has the twin arc laser coating that a lot of automakers are doing these days. Mercedes has done it, Nissan has done it. I think Ford's doing it. Ford may have pioneered the technology. I forget. That was a couple years ago. But they do that, to reduce weight, get really thin cylinder walls that way. The turbochargers themselves, 18 pounds is the maximum boost pressure. The oil system, there's 2 oil pumps in the pan, or there's 2 oil pumps, and it's magnesium oil pan. And as they explain it, they had to do a magnesium oil pan to offset the weight and adding another oil pump into the pickup there. There's a pretty wild cooling system on this car because this engine's going to make a lot of heat. So it's a really compact but really dense cooling system, as you'll see in a graph in a little bit. Actually, in a little bit, the next one. This is a cooling system, and there's 7 heat exchangers, which is kind of nuts. Of course, there'll be 6 if you get the manual, because you don't have to worry about DCT oil, I don't think. Actually, there might be an oil cooler for the manual trans. I should have found that out. I don't know. But it's a pretty serious cooling system. And in my experience with the car, we weren't able to overheat it. In fact, jumping forward a little bit, we drove through Las Vegas, and coming back into Los Angeles before Barstow, there was an accident. We were stopped in traffic for quite a bit in 100-degree heat, and the car actually cooled down in stop and go. We were, cruising at a high rate of speed all the way, and the temp was fine. But it was interesting when we stopped in 100-degree heat, the cooling system actually cooled the car down. Maybe the gauge is wrong. I don't know. Still, that's the first time I've ever seen that, which was pretty interesting. The drivetrain and chassis. Transmissions, 6-speed manual, or the twin clutch DCT transmission. Both of those transmissions have rev matching, even the manual. You can defeat it on the manual, but the twin clutch is going to always match revs, as you'd expect. Interestingly, the twin clutch transmission is actually the same as the M5 transmission. The gear ratios and everything are identical. The difference is the M3 uses a slightly shorter rear end, and the 6-speed manual is actually based off the one that came out of the 1 Series M, or the 1M, which itself was based on the 135i's transmission. I unfortunately didn't drive a manual M3, but I have little reason to doubt that it will be great, because the 1M's transmission was like one of my favorite parts about the car, aside from how fun it was with the torque and all that. It was a really nice transmission. The manual is actually a bit lighter than the twin clutch, say about 80 pounds lighter than the twin clutch. The DCT is 183 pounds, the manual is 106 pounds. So if you want the lightest weight transmission you can get the manual. The differential is also from the M5. And it was really interesting on the track, because I didn't know this. Went out to Road America, did a few laps, and noticed that the rear end felt very much like the M5. Came in, asked them, I was like, this kind of feels a lot like a small M5, and they were like, yeah, it's the same diff and the same trans, and the rear suspension follows the same philosophy as the M5. So there's a lot of M5 philosophy concepts in this M3, which shouldn't be too surprising, because the team that made the M5 is also the same team that made the M3, so duh. But it was interesting to experience that. Those concepts, for example, the rear suspension is bolted directly to the body. There's no bushings in the rear axle at all. There are some in the diff, as I understand, or surrounding the diff, but the suspension itself is bolted straight in. I have some iPhone pictures I can show you later of those bolts, which is pretty cool. Brakes, you get carbon ceramic brakes, I believe, for the first time on an M3. They're optional. They're quite a hefty cost. You pay $8,150 for carbon ceramics, and you have to get $1,900 19-inch wheels. So out the door, when you get those brakes, you're out over $10,000 for carbon ceramics. They are lighter the rotors themselves, the braking system is lighter than the standard brakes, despite being slightly bigger. I'm not sure how much of that weight loss you maintain when you put on the 19-inch wheels. Both the standard 18-inch wheels and the 19-inch wheels are forged, but I should have found out how much weight you add with a 19, because I'm not sure you actually hold on to that weight loss with carbon ceramics. Anyway, we'll get more detail into brakes later. A lot of carbon fiber in the car. This is the first time, the M3 last year, the coupe, had a carbon fiber roof. Now the sedan has a carbon fiber roof as well, and there's carbon fiber sort of throughout the car. They didn't know, it's not going to be hand-laid carbon fiber. It's going to be probably injection molding. They weren't able to confirm that at the launch, but it is there, and it is light. On the M4, one of the interesting weight reduction things they did was they deleted the seatbelt robots. So a lot of these, the E46 and I think the E36, you'd hop in and these little motors would actually hand you the seatbelt over your left shoulder. Those apparently were worth cutting for weight reduction, which is interesting because I kind of liked those guys. But yeah. They also took out some sound insulation. The M4 has less sound insulation than the M3. But otherwise, they drive the same. I drove the M3 a lot more than I drove the M4. And the M4 was louder, but I couldn't really find a massive difference between the two that would make me want the M4 more than the M3. Yeah, so moving on. Pricing of the car. I guess we'll get into some options and stuff later. They're built in different factories, and the M4 is a little bit more expensive than the M3. I really like the M3. I think the M3 is the one to get, but anyway. Standard equipment includes power front seats, front heated seats, which is a bit of a bummer. If I could spec one of these cars out myself, I'd like to get cloth manual seats, fixed dampers, but you can't because the way they bunch options up. Anyway, so now we're talking about tires. This car, it has Michelin Pilot Super Sports cups, and this is demonstrating how long Michelin's been working with BMW and how long and what that means and yada yada yada. All the Michelin tires on these cars right now. I imagine they'll get Continental tires late this year. I think all the launch cars have Michelin's, but the last M3, depending on when you ordered it, when you optioned it, would either come with Michelin's or Continental tires. All the M3s and M4s, for the time being, are on Michelin's. This is going off all the prototypes they used, yada yada yada. And there's the tires themselves, 255 40/18s or 275 40/18s in the rear, and they do a 19-inch wheel. It's obviously. So one of the things they also brought up was now they've actually integrated the GoPro app that you can use on your phone into iDrive. It's pretty interesting. I'd like to play with it a bit to see if it's actually worth doing it through the center screen. You set up your GoPro outside the car, you turn on the app on your phone, and then you can actually control it through the screen, iDrive. And that might come in handy on track days. When you don't want to be fiddling around with your phone, you just want to have that locked and secured away. That was pretty interesting. I'd really like to play with that a bit before I make a judgment on it. So, Road America. This was my first time at Road America. It's a very, very, very cool racetrack. Of course, when we showed up there, it was absolutely pouring rain. I mean, we got there in the morning and it was just coming down. And I'm not talking like Los Angeles were so afraid of rain. I mean, like legit rain. So that's kind of a concern because Road America is a very, very, very fast track. The M3 and M4 have an electronic speed limiter at 155 miles an hour, and on this front straight here, these cars could do 150 in the rain. So it's a fast track, but it's a really fun track, especially over here in Canada Corner, Thunder Valley, and Bill Mitchell Bend. You can carry a lot of speed into 13. Learning how fast you can come into 13 is a lot of fun. I had a great time. around this track. This carousel is so long. I wanted to drift the entire carousel. Unfortunately, I didn't get time to do that or try that. Could have been interesting in the rain. We actually ran the kink too, because there were some incidents at 11. I think there was an incident at 11. Maybe not. But anyway, this straight here too is a lot of fun because you end up going really, really fast. Very cool racetrack. I'd love to go back in the dry and try it out again because I had a ton of fun there. Some of the guides, blah, blah, this stuff. Kind of not significant. Okay, so now we get into the detail of the engine. So the turbos hanging off the side, they're mono-scroll. They're single-scroll turbos. BMW's made a big deal about using twin-scroll turbos in the past, so it's interesting to use mono-scroll turbos. The reason why is because you use a twin-scroll when you need to arrange the exhaust pulses in a way that keeps that turbo running the way it should. With the way the six-cylinder setup is, you don't need to worry about setting up those exhaust pulses. They come out in an ideal fashion when you can isolate the three cylinders individually. So we have a mono-scroll turbo per three cylinders, and another mono-scroll turbo per three cylinders, and it works. And boy, does it build boost fast, as we'll get to later, talking about power delivery and so on and so on. The crank is lighter than the 435i. All these comparisons are going to be against the 435i, because as I understand it, that's what all this stuff is based off of. The 435i kind of was the foundation, not the foundation, I guess, but I guess the most comparable car. The M3 or the 3 Series, let's back up. The 3 Series is narrower than the 4 Series. And so if all the components for the M car are all based off the 4 Series, they all need to fit under the M3, and that's why the M3 has those kick-ass wide rear fenders. It's because it's wider. It needs to accommodate all the hardware. So that's why you see a lot of 435 comparisons here. Crank is again lighter than the 435i. You're going to see this weight being stressed as a factor quite a bit. Because it adds up. In fact, we weighed an M3 with the twin clutch, with all that, and when compared against our last M3 long-termer, which had a twin clutch and all that, they're similarly optioned. The new M3, the F80, is about 100 pounds less. So the weight difference pays off. You see them also stressing high revving character. That was kind of the interesting thing, and my only real disappointment with the 1M was that its peak power was at like 5,900 RPM. I have it written down here. Yeah, 5,900 RPM, and Redline was 1,100 RPM later. And what I loved about the E30, E36, E46, and E90, E9X was how they revved. Really ringing those engines out to Redline is so much fun. So they actually paid a lot of attention to making sure this engine's making power close to Redline. It spins up to 7,500 RPM, and power does fall off a little bit starting at 7,000 RPM, but you can carry it out. You don't have to worry about short shifting. The nice thing is with all the extra torque, you have a lot of gear options. You can choose, you can be a gear up higher than you normally would be around certain corners, and you don't really get any downside. So the powertrain is a bit more flexible now, but it still has the high revving stuff that's so much fun. With the oil system and the cooling system, I'd like to do some hot weather tests to see how effective it is. As I mentioned, our day at Road America was in the rain, so it wasn't hot. And we had this M3 after we took it back to LA. After I drove it back, we took it up to the test track, and it was a moderately hot day, and we did our testing, and temperature was fine. I'm curious how it would do at a day up at Willow Springs or so, in high speed, sustained high revs, and see how it would hold up. I'm kind of eager to test it. Hopefully we can do that in the future, because I want to see how robust this cooling system is, because it's going to be important if you're going to track these cars. Turbos make heat. That's the byproduct of what they do, aside from power. And so I really want to test this cooling system. From what I've seen so far, though, given by that Las Vegas example earlier, I'm sure it's going to work great. And then you see, how did they, okay, they didn't put a weight gain. They didn't show the weight gain of that extra pump, but they do brag about the weight difference from the magnesium oil sump or the oil pan. It's a bummer that this got cut off here. But there's your intercooler. Oh, and here we see, should have saved that single scroll turbo talk for here. But anyway, here's how they work basically. The firing order means the pulses are arranged in such a way that you don't need twin scroll turbos. The pulses come out exactly as they should. And this thing has a peak boost of 18 pounds, but it doesn't necessarily make that. It only makes that if the car needs to make it in order to get the torque that the driver's requesting. Interestingly, BMW is not doing any sort of torque management. We've heard a couple automakers out of Germany and Italy, Europe overall, they're trying to control torque in a way that either makes the driving experience more thrilling or whatever. They have certain, they want to tailor the torque response in a way. BMW says, no, we're just going to give you all the torque as soon as we can. They're going to race these turbos to get boost as quick as possible. And the effect is really interesting on the track. If you're used to driving an E9X M3, you better be careful when you start pushing this thing hard laterally, because it was surprising to me. I'm fairly used to E9X M3 just because I love that engine so much. The V8 was really linear with its power delivery. If you look at a torque curve, which we'll look at later, the power band was so predictable and so responsive that when you asked a specific amount of throttle, you always knew what you were going to get in return. You could predict the way the power was going to build up because it felt really natural. With this engine, it's totally different ballgame because it makes so much torque so early, and that power remains so consistent through the power band that when you start rolling into throttle, you really have to anticipate the torque response, especially if you're driving it hard in the rain, as I was, because what happens is you start spinning the tires all over the place if you aren't familiar with how quickly that torque comes in. So it takes a little bit to learn, but it's really interesting. That was the first, driving these cars in the rain on summer tires, you're not going to learn much, but the rain demonstrated very quickly how much the power band has shifted, how much it's changed, and what the addition of these turbos mean. This car's faster, absolutely much faster in every way than the outgoing M3, but the power delivery is a lot different. It's probably the most dramatic change the M3 has ever seen. And is it for the better? It's faster, but I do miss high-revving naturally aspirated engines. They aren't long for this world, but I do miss them. The turbine here, the hot side, the exhaust side part of the turbo. So this, traditional turbo, this is the turbo right here, essentially. There's your exhaust ports coming out through here. They're coming down through this pipe, spinning a turbine here, which spins an impeller here, which compresses air as it goes through. That's Turbo 101. The turbine is integrated into the exhaust manifold, and that's going to help with building boost quickly and yada yada yada. I'm really interested to see how the aftermarket world will deal with this, because I'm sure they're going to see a lot of these engines with more boost and different turbos and stuff, and I'll be curious to see if they're going to put on a different impeller, a different intake side, or if they're actually going to swap these guys out too, if they're just going to go to a big single. It'd be really interesting to see how this engine evolves in the hands of the tuning industry. Just kind of fascinated. Not that I'd recommend you add more power to this car. This car doesn't need more power at all. Few cars these days need more power. This thing needs a good driver. Not that it's going to punish a bad driver, but you could spend a couple $1,000s tuning this thing, or you could spend a couple $1,000s on a driving school, and the driving school will make you faster in this car, not the power. In fact, that's true for most cars, but it's not as cool for bragging rights on the internet. Whatever. The exhaust is interesting. Looking at the back, it seems like the goal was to always have all four tips driving exhaust flow. Like pretty much most sports cars, when you get to a certain throttle load and you're driving in a certain condition, there are flaps that open that make the car sound louder. And it's a cool effect when it does. But it's really interesting to see that BMW's desire was to make sure that there's always, the exhaust gas is always coming out of all 4 tips instead of 2. Pretty much everybody else, if I can think about it, I think pretty much everybody else either gives you 2 or the other 2. Like Corvette, it's pretty obvious because 2 pipes will be clean and 2 pipes will be dirty. Same thing with Ferrari. Those are the 2 examples off the top of my head. So interesting philosophy here. The M3 and the M4 sound better from the outside than they do on the inside. From the outside, they have the straight 6 rasp. From the inside, it's I can't really say it's a pleasant noise. I'm not a big fan of the noise that it makes. It does have active sound generation, and what that means is they've taken the engine and recorded what it produces, the sounds it produces under all the different loads and conditions and so on, and they've minimized the unappealing sounds and maximized the appealing sounds, and that's what plays when you step on the throttle. They looked into doing other types of sound enhancement, like even hooking up a microphone, but they found that the latency with a microphone and the speaker system was just not ideal. It never worked. So this system is what they settled on. And, I think the system is kind of cool in the M5. It gives that engine an interesting sound. It kind of has this almost V10 sort of warble. But in this, it's kind of like this metallic, harsh, ugly noise. And I kind of wanted to turn it off, frankly. It just doesn't sound that great. It's just this, I don't really know the best way to describe it. Hopefully you can hear it in the ignition video. The outside sound is different than the inside sound. The outside sound's better, like I mentioned. The inside sound you can adjust by changing the throttle setting, Efficient Sport, Sport Plus. The more aggressive you get on the throttle setting, the louder it's going to get. And I left it in efficient simply because, one, I liked the long lever on the throttle. I'll talk a bit about that later. But I also wanted to make that noise quiet, which is a bit of a shame. I hope they can tune that and make it sound a bit better. Yeah. And, with the active sound stuff, there's a lot of hubbub on the internet about they're just pumping it through the speakers. That's embarrassing, blah, blah. It's all sports car exhausts lie. There is not one sports car out there from a major manufacturer that makes the sound the engine makes naturally. They're all tuned, they're all modified, they run special timing, spark programs, whatever. Everything's modified to sound a specific way. I mean, some companies have entire divisions dedicated to making exhaust systems sound a specific way. So where do you draw the line? I don't really mind, the fake sound through the interior. One, because it's not fake, it's the sound the engine makes. Two, who cares? If you didn't know this stuff existed, you wouldn't notice it unless you were pulling fuses for some reason, and you would notice things get quieter. So I'm in the mindset whatever, it can make the experience better like it does in the M5, and it also gives you some interesting tuning possibilities too. I think it's really interesting, and I'm curious to see how more companies develop it. And so I don't really get the hubbub about the fake sound. They're all fake. Nothing's natural, so whatever. Aerodynamics. So the M3 and the M4, they don't make downforce. They try to reduce lift as much as possible, and a couple different ways. They don't have a flat underbelly, but the front end, the underside of the front end is kind of flat, kind of boxed off. They do the air curtain thing that was started, I think, on the 1 Series M. They did it on the 4 Series too. And what that means is there's a vent on the fascia here, and there's a vent on the back of the fender here. And the concept is air comes through the vent, goes around the front wheel and out of the vent here. The concept is to reduce the turbulence that wheels create with airflow. And they do create quite a bit of air turbulence. Interesting concept. Again, I'm not an aerodynamicist, so I don't really know how valid it is, but I assume BMW knows what they're doing, so pretty interesting stuff. It does make for a kind of a busy looking fascia, There's a lot of stuff happening here, especially with the induction happening for the air curtain. But it's functional, so that's cool. The cooling system. I think I've already talked quite a bit at length about this. Again, I hope to test this system out a lot more because I'm always interested to see how these things hold up. So the transmission. I already mentioned that these things, the DCT and the diff, are from the M5, and they both do rev matching. Was there anything else worth mentioning on the trans itself? You can, on the DCT, you can adjust how harsh the transmission shifts, and in Sport Plus, it gets ridiculous. I mean, in the rain, I tried it in Sport Plus with the stability control in the intermediary setting, M dynamic mode, and every time you grabbed an upshift, it would engage stability control. You'd feel it sort of slide around. It's kind of ridiculous. I backed off from that because I thought, this might be a bit much. So the chassis itself, the chassis was the most impressive thing by far. This is the stiffest M3 and M4. Well, it's, of course, the stiffest M4. There's never been an M4. Stiffest M3 I've ever experienced. It was kind of crazy. BMW says torsional rigidity is 40,000 Newton meters per degree, and they also say that is a lot higher than previous M3 racing cars, touring cars, and not far off of the GTR. I wasn't able to verify that because I don't know if there's like an SAE standard for measuring torsional rigidity. But so I'm not really sure about the GTR comparison. But I'll trust that when BMW says the torsional rigidity is higher than the race cars, and they accomplish that through these really intricate stiffening devices throughout the front and the rear. And the craziest one is this strut tower brace that BMW calls it, but it's not really a strut tower brace. You have effectively like a cage around the engine that boxes everything in, and it makes for a really, really stiff car. You feel it in the steering, you feel it in the ride. This thing it gives you that sense, kind of like a 911 does, that the car is milled from like one piece of metal, and that when you turn, there's no flex, there's no pieces flexing within another. It just, this whole machine moves as one. It's a great feeling for sports cars, and it's how I wish sports cars felt, without much flex, just this one piece moving. And when you get that, you get a lot of feedback from the chassis through the steering, so when you're driving, the car becomes very, very, very predictable. Steering is electronically assisted, but who cares? A lot of people are still like, electronic assistance, it's going to ruin steering feel. No, the steering feel in the M3 and the M4 is fantastic. You know exactly what those front tires are doing, and there's enough feedback from the road that into the rim that it feels great. I would take this steering system over any hydraulic system I could think of because it works so well. One thing I wanted to talk about on the diff, though, as I found this out, Road America did dry out later in the day. Around lunchtime, it was dry, so I was trying to get as many laps as I could in the dry. The interesting thing, the thing that I really liked is you can, when you're mid-corner in this car, the steering's so great because you can just set it up, you just make that one turn. You don't need to correct, you don't need to change your input based on what the car is doing. It's so communicative that you can just make one input and around the corner. And as you roll into the throttle, the diff is set up in a way that it'll actually help turn the car. You get some really good throttle steer as you power through, and it's a really fun sensation when you drive this car around corners. This car is a really good rear drive sports car. It's really good to learn the basics of rear drive handling. If I was running a driving school, I'd probably have a bunch of M3s because it's kind of like the BRZ was a really good educator in how rear drive cars behave. This is a properly set up, really well balanced rear drive car. If you enter too fast, you do get some push, but driven correctly, this car will tell you how much fun you can have in a rear drive car, and you can have a lot of fun in a rear drive car. More lightness, more weight reduction, carbon ceramic brakes. I've covered a lot of this stuff already. You do have optional adaptive dampers. They don't weigh anything different essentially than the standard dampers. They actually weigh less than the 435i's adaptive dampers because, or they don't. There's not much weight difference between the standard damper and the adaptive damper because the adaptive system is very small. It's just a small electric system. It's not like a big complex thing. I didn't drive any car with adaptive dampers, so I can't really comment on how well they worked, but I was really happy with the fixed rate dampers. And I don't really, I find when I drive these cars with all these settings is I never really play with them too much. I have one setting that I drive the car always in, and that's it. And I kind of just forget about it after that. So when you have adaptive damper systems, I'm driving a 328D right now that has a Comfort, Sport, and Sport Plus, and I just stick to Comfort. I never dial it up, I never dial it down. I just like leaving it in one setting, put it in that mode, forget about it, don't worry about it. So all these adaptive systems, I'm kind of like, I like the predictability and linearity of a fixed system that doesn't change much in regards to driving hard. If you like customizing your stuff, by all means, get the adaptive stuff. So the standard brakes versus carbon ceramic. Standard are 15-inch rotors in the front, and the carbon ceramics are 15.7-inch rotors in the front. On the standard brakes, they've gone 4-piston front, 2-piston rear, which is an upgrade from the M3. And then on the carbon ceramic, they're 6-piston front, 4-piston rear. And of course, when you get carbon ceramics, they're gold because, you really got to show off that you got carbon ceramics. They do look cool, especially behind the gray 19-inch wheels. I think those are the wheels to get, not the silver ones. The gray ones look really neat. Stopping distance is very good with the tire. I think our test, we got like under 100 feet, 60 to 0 in our peak, stopping. So the stopping system here is very effective. It works very well. Now we get into the carbon fiber elements. There's a lot of carbon fiber in the car, and that helps with reducing weight. The trunk lid is one example on the M4. The roof too. Roof saves 24.3 pounds. And the nice thing about that weight reduction in the roof is it effectively lowers the center of gravity, or reduces it because you're reducing the weight on top. It lowers the center of gravity. M4 is a little bit shorter than the M3, if I recall correctly, and I like that. I wish you could get like a lower roof M3. The height of that roof is pretty surprising. It seems pretty tall. And then there's the strut brace. When you pop the hood, that carbon fiber strut brace is the most eye-catching thing. And it's a bummer too because it's doing so much more underneath that that I'm kind of looking at that. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool, that's carbon fiber. But where is it connected to? And the connections are way more interesting. I'll show you some pictures of that later. The drive shaft is also carbon fiber, one piece, and that is about 12 pounds weight reduction. Okay, so that's it for the presentation. Let's go into some pictures here. So here is the interior. I don't know if this is an M3 or an M4. Doesn't really matter though because they're effectively the same. You have the new M design steering wheel, which feels great in your hands, and everything else is pretty much standard BMW M stuff. This is a German car, that's why everything's in Celsius and all the text is in German. But whatever. A lot of carbon fiber plaques and trim and stuff, which is kind of a bummer. I'm tired, as I mentioned in the P1 video. I'm tired of carbon fiber as a design motif. I'd like to see some other materials in there. But hey, if you got it, flaunt it. If you like carbon fiber, go for it. So here is the iDrive selector. iDrive is very good these days. It's my favorite in the luxury car setting. I like this over MMI. I like this over Mercedes Command. I think it's Command. This is the most intuitive, easiest to learn, and very powerful system too. And then there's the twin clutch shifter. It's like all M3 twin clutch shifters have been. You slide it over to the right for drive, or for automatic, and you hit it over to the right again to go into manual mode. Neutral's to the left, and reverse is left and up. And you can see the drive mode selector buttons here. I think we got a better picture of that. Okay, so here's a better picture of that. So tap the stability control button once, you go into MDM, and MDM basically opens up the amount of slip the rear end will give you before intervenes. And it intervenes really smartly. It's pretty smooth so long as you're driving smooth. It comes in strong when you need it, and it's easy to need it with the torque on tap. This is your throttle setting, this is your damper setting, this is your steering setting, and this is your shift setting. The first time I went out with throttle and sport. I had fixed dampers, so I didn't do any of that. And then I had the steering in sport and the trans in sport plus, and this in MDM mode. And it was a bit much. I ended up backing down throttle to efficient, because when you have the efficient throttle, you have this nice long lever, which is great when you're managing the amount of power this car has and how quickly that power comes in. Sport and Sport Plus, the throttle was a little too responsive. You kind of want on a leader bike, you really want a slow throttle for the control. Not that you're dealing with this, that kind of power to weight here, but if you want to drive this car as smooth as possible, which you want to do, you want that nice long throttle. So I backed that out into efficient, and as I learned later, that's what a lot of the drivers, like the performance drivers for BMW, have done as well. So that kind of illustrates to me that maybe they've overdone it on the Sport and Sport Plus throttle. Steering too, once you put it in Sport, don't bother with Sport Plus or Comfort with what are the other two options. Sport Plus brings up the effort way too high, and Comfort makes it feel way too loose. I don't know why they keep doing all these options. And then on the shift setting here, you put it in the most aggressive shift setting, and it really bangs the gears. I mean, like it feels like you're doing full throttle upshifts, like just no lift shifts. In second gear, like it'll chatter the rear tires. And I don't know how much of that is, it feels like a lot of it's for show. I don't know how much of it actually is for show, but it feels like it is, with regard to shift harshness and the tires spin and all that stuff. It does shift fast, but I kind of prefer driving it in sport just because upshifts could upset the chassis way more than I liked. So, in my mindset, I'm just thinking hey, BMW, there's correct settings for these options. If you're concerned about driving fast, just choose them. You're okay to say, as the M division, it's okay to say, no, this is the way the throttle response should be, this is the way steering should be, this is the way transmission shifts should be, and just do that. That's kind of what Porsche does, and that's kind of why I respect Porsche. They don't fake up shifts or anything. They just say, no, this is the shift that you want, and let you go for it. That said, if you put the throttle in Sport Plus, you put the trans in the harshest shift setting, and you bang some gears, you're going to impress your friends, and so there's that. For the people who just buy these cars and drive around town, commute to work, these buttons do add a bit of theater. So there is that side of the argument as well. Who's to say, who's right? The people who are buying the cars, or the people who, like me, who don't buy these cars but rant on and on about driving them hard. So I guess it doesn't matter so long as you can choose your options and just forget about it. And you can. The nice thing is this M1, M2 button here, they're basically like presets. So you can select two different driving modes, and then basically hit one or the other. So if you have I have a cruise around town mode, that's M1. I have the track attack mode, M2, which is nice. Launch control has also been improved versus the M5. Still not great. I don't know if BMW, I don't know what they're doing with acceleration and starts. So the M5 was a big pain because they had to do all kinds of things to get it into launch control, and it never really worked right, and you only got so many times to do it when it did work right, and it was frustrating. You have to do a lot less with the M3. If I can recall correctly, it's traction control, stability control off, harshest shift on the shifter, and then you just, once you're in manual mode, you just flatten gear or brake and throttle, and then it holds RPMs. You can change RPM with the cruise control lever here, and then you release the brake. All it does, though, is spin the tires, which is not fast. It produces consistent acceleration, but we actually found out that if you don't hold revs, if you just mash the gas, if you just roll into it, it's a little bit faster, which is interesting. Also kind of disappointing because, there's I only do launch control and acceleration runs when we're testing these cars. I'm not the kind of guy who's going to do launch control on the street or anything like that. But if you're going to do something, do it right. If you're going to option launch control, do it right. And that's kind of something I've been ranting on BMW for a long time. Even if 10% of your audience or buyers are going to use launch control, you should still have the system set up properly. It should still work. And they're close. They're getting closer. They're a lot better than they were on the M5, but still not 100% yet. And the car has stop-start. Like all BMWs. It's a little clunky, but it's nice to save fuel because this thing goes through fuel at an alarming rate when you're on the throttle. This thing is a very thirsty engine. When you're off boost, it's fine, but when you're going fast, it likes to drink the stuff down. The seats are very, very nice. The buckets, the car that we drove had cloth buckets, and that's the seat I want. Very supportive, when you're driving hard, for pretty much all body types. I haven't yet to hear a complaint. And comfortable, too. I did 800 miles in this car one day, and I was fine. No back pain, no comfort issues, nothing. It was a great experience. These are really cool seats. The interesting little detail is the M light. This M logo will actually light up when you unlock the car at night. So like some cars these days, when you unlock them, there's a little light on the side of your mirror that shines down on the ground that shows a little emblem. Like Jeeps show the Jeep logo, Mustangs show the prancing or show the horse. These little M logos light up. It's kind of an interesting little touch. Really interesting, kind of cheesy too, but also kind of neat, kind of cute. I just like this is the power output. You can show how much horsepower and torque you're making, or kilowatts or newton meters. But Sportzeichen, it's a very German way to show sport logo, sport gauges, Sportenzeichen, whatever. And some iPhone photos. So when I was talking about rain at Road America, this is literally what the track looked like when we showed up with hood scoops on that Toyota, which was pretty funny. But yeah, we drove from Wisconsin to LA in about 3 days, and that was a really interesting experience because it really shows how focused this car is. This car is set up aggressively, and that's really, really good. The rear suspension, being bolted right in, there's some downsides in terms of ride comfort and tire noise and so on. There was one stretch of freeway in Iowa where a patch of roadwork created just this interminable high-pitch noise. It was kind of like, oh, is this going to stop? And then we switched pavement and it was fine. But yeah, this thing makes a lot of road noise. The impacts are pretty pronounced. You have to keep two hands on the steering wheel at all times because it's the front end, the steering commands attention. And those aren't bad things. Those are just byproducts of what makes this car so much fun to drive. It's just interesting to note that when you're driving down the freeway. This car also really hides its speed. When you're, with the previous cars, you always knew when you were accelerating because you'd hear the exhaust. The V8, it was, and the E46 is straight 6. Those made very, very obvious noises when he started accelerating. Very beautiful, cool sounding noises too. With this car, the turbos are pretty quiet. You don't really sense when the acceleration's happening until you're on the throttle and the flaps have opened up and it's playing all the sounds and stuff. That's when you really notice acceleration. But part throttle, it builds torque so quickly and that torque feels good that you will catch yourself speeding all the time. I think this thing's going to generate a lot of speeding tickets just because people are unaware. And it's interesting too because you have that acceleration, but two, it's the utter stability of the car. This thing at 100 feels like it's doing 50. It is so stable at speed. And that's really good because it makes the car feel controllable, makes the car feel easy to access. It makes the car really engaging to drive because you're not worrying about a lot of different things that other cars make you worry about. This thing has a kind of stability at 140 miles an hour that feels great. If you're going to push this car hard, you will be going fast, but you will be having a great time doing it. Just watch out for the police officers because they will nail you. We were able to evade all tickets because BMW has a speed warning you can set. So we set it at 85, and pretty much every on-ramp we'd hear the chime just because, like, wow, this thing accelerates so fast. So this was at Road America, and these are the M3s they had lined up, all generations. And these, with the exception of the E46, I think these are the cars that we drove in that one ignition episode where we drove all 4 M3s. And it was really cool to see these cars again because they're just such cool cars. So an M3 was at the event, and M3 was up on the lift getting its wheels and tires changed. And when I saw an opportunity, I just threw my iPhone underneath it and started taking as many photos as I could of the undercarriage, trying to pick out interesting things. The photos aren't particularly great because I was trying to, get in there to shoot whatever I could. We're looking at the rear brake rotor on a carbon ceramic equipped M3. And here are some of the suspension mounting points. So the entire suspension is basically new. It's all aluminum. The wheel carriers, the control arms, everything is aluminum to reduce weight. And it's effective at that. I wonder if we could find a picture of that bolt, or the bolts where the rear end's bolted in. All the links there. Oh, this is going to be the front now. Same car, carbon ceramic rotors. What are we looking at? Anti-roll bar there. Link there. Steering there. Yeah, again, they're not really great photos. This is the front, so this is the under tray. How many panels they put there to help with airflow. And I wonder if they have to do this for protection too, because I don't know how strong magnesium is. But I wonder if that's there to protect it. Oh, here we go. So this is one of the bolts that connects the rear subframe to the body of the car. And there's a couple like this all over, and there's no bushings. And when you drive a car like this, you realize why some cars have bushings, and it's because they take out unwanted vibrations and stuff. This car doesn't do any of that, and that's great. Here's that carbon fiber brace that goes around the front. It looks cool. There's the connecting points up here. But what's really interesting is when you follow this back, where my mouse cursor is going, and you see how big the links are. This link right here is like almost this entire area, and it goes all the way back to the A pillar. So there's a link, and if you pop up this piece right here, you see this enormous brace essentially, and the links go all the way back to the A pillar. It's really interesting stuff that I haven't seen on many production cars. And that's what helps it get that rigidity they were aiming for. They had a couple of race cars there as well at the launch, and they were cool because race cars are cool. And it was interesting poking and prodding around before the days where you had automatic pit speed buttons. You just had to remember, hey, just go 3,300 RPM in third and you won't break pit speed, which is pretty cool. And here's an E92 based M3 race car, and the funny thing was I popped my head inside and saw on the steering wheel the fancy button. I was like, huh? Why is there a button marked fancy? And according to BMW, what that would do is it would kill accessories. These cars had some accessories for racing spec, like air conditioning and stuff, because this is a Le Mans car, if I recall correctly. Please forgive my ignorance on which class this ran in. But hitting that button did a number of things, and one of them was cut accessories to give you 3 extra horsepower so you could execute a pass. So they would be on the radios saying, hey, give a bit of fancy on this next corner, and the other people listening in would be like, what is this fancy they're talking about? What fancy are they doing? It's just funny they call it fancy. Oh yeah, we caught this in Wisconsin. So we had an M3 in Austin yellow metallic, and boy, does that color get attention. I'll say this about the color: it photographs nicely. Pretty much every camera you point at this car takes a good picture because the color is so vibrant. It's not a color for me. I'd probably get this in gray. Interestingly, it doesn't look that good in white. There was a white car at the launch, and there's just something about it that seemed off. But there was also an M4 that was like this dark gray with dark gray wheels that looked fantastic. Now, why did I take this picture? Well, look at how wide that fender is, or the quarter panel is. I just love flared fenders, and I believe there is a direct relationship. There's a correlation between the width of a car's fenders and how good that car is. And I think, going back in history, I think it's pretty consistent. The wider your fenders are, the more flared they are, the better the car is. So I really like to see flared fenders. I kind of wish they did box fenders on these things, but that's just getting silly. And here's the front. These are both off Instagram, so apologies if you've seen them before. And the rear. The color really does stick out. I mean, we'd stopped in some towns for lunch and stuff, like in Iowa, and basically brought this small town to a halt. Like, everybody was like, why is it, what color? Like, why? And I kind of see their point. It's a bit much. I don't, if you're into the color, cool. If you're, that's your thing. I don't like to get attention. I don't like to catch attention when I drive. I like stealth cars because I'm not out there to cause a scene or to attract attention. I'm there just to enjoy driving. So I like these cars in more muted shapes. That's why I like sedans. That's why I like the M3 traditionally, the sedan more than the coupe, because you get it in a non-sexy color, and you don't do anything, you don't touch the exhaust or anything, you leave it pretty standard, and you can have a great time without attracting too much attention. And that's what I like to do. Stay inconspicuous but still manage to enjoy yourself. And it's tough to do that when your car is nuclear yellow, as this obviously is. So this was the start of the road trip. I'm not going to bore you with a ton of pictures from the road trip, but it was 2,000 miles roughly, and it did about 3 days. The car was great on it though. Aside from, it may sound like the car is rough. It's not. It's stiff. It's a bit loud, but it's still a car I'd feel fine driving every day. I mean, it's not extreme. And what makes that loudness and the stiffness tolerable is the benefits that they give to how the car performs when you're driving it hard, and it performs really well, really well. This car is so much fun to throw around. It can drift and drift and drift and drift, as you'll see in the ignition video coming out shortly. But as I mentioned with fuel economy, oh man, during our test day last week, 2 weeks ago, we went through a tank of fuel in about 70 miles. I mean, when you're driving hard, it's going to go through a lot of fuel. When you're driving normally, though, when you got cruise control and you're out of boost, it's tolerable. But when you're on it, it's a thirsty car. Range is better than the previous M3. The previous M3 had a very laughably small range. This is much better. Still not, you're still paying prices for driving a sports car. What I liked is the hint. I was checking through the owner's manual. You do things when you're on a 2,000 mile drive, reading the owner's manual, and I just like that there's a hint for starting the engine. Like, hey, don't do that in a closed area. Just FYI, you could die. So don't do that. And then activating M dynamic mode. What do you think this means? M dynamic mode makes it possible to drive on a dry roadway with high longitudinal and transverse acceleration, but with limited driving stability. That's a great euphemism for M dynamic mode allows you to slide. It's cute. This was me playing with the speed warning. You can set it at 200 miles an hour, which is a bit optimistic, again, because top speed is 155 miles an hour. There's my dad in the back. He joined me on the road trip. Again, this car is so yellow. Utah has great speed limits. Yeah, it just photographs real well. And there's the lighted up seat. I took that in the parking garage where I live, and yeah, that's the illumination, the M illumination. So I wonder if it's too quick to go into dyno stuff. I wonder if there's anything I'm missing before we start talking dyno numbers. So let me just check my notes really quick. So just to bullet point some stuff, M3 is F80, like the M3 Coupe is E90. M4 is F82, like the M3 Coupe last gen was E92. I'm sure the convertible M4 will be F81, like the E91 was. Anyway, RPM M3. So maybe it's a good time, yeah. This straight six is rated at 406 pound-feet of torque, 425 horsepower, 406 pound-feet of torque. So that's a gain in claim numbers of 111 pound-feet over the V8. Now that is huge. Also, it's rated at 1500 RPM. Now that produces a dramatic change on the way you drive the car because that torque just comes in so suddenly, so quickly, and it feels great when it comes in too. It just is, wow. If you drive these two cars back to back, you will be shocked and awed at how quickly that torque comes in. So in order to figure out how the size of that difference, we dynoed an F80 M3 and an E92 M3 just to see the comparison. So here they are at K&N dyno on the rollers there. Now I stress a lot of people look at dyno numbers the wrong way. A lot of people look at small gains and peak power when you look at dyno numbers, and that's not the right way to do it. The right way to do it, that's not the right way to do it if you're just trying to get a gist of the power band. If you're looking for specific power gains and you have a controlled environment where you're installing the part, you're dynoing the car in stock condition, you add a part, then you dyno it again, yeah, okay, that's a good time to start looking for gains and how you reshape the power curve. But for this sake, for the comparison, don't pay as much attention to the specific numbers, but the shape of the power band. That'll tell you more than the specifics. This is a much better tool in broad general terms than it is in specifics. And so there's the E92 M3 we dynoed, and I'll tell you, maybe I can add in iPhone video of these cars being dynoed, because the E92 sounded a lot better than the F80. I mean, F80 sounds, the exhaust sounds pretty good, but then you hear the E90 and you're like, yeah, okay, the V8 at 9,000 or 8,400 RPM or whatever sounds pretty wicked. So here's the power difference. So black, obviously, is the E92. Red is the F80. So we did the E92 in 5th gear and the F80 in 4th gear. Why? Okay, so if you actually do the math and calculate those gear ratios through the rear end, they're the most similar, numerically speaking. So that's it. And what these essentially represent is if you're cruising down the road at 2,000 RPM or so, and then just stomp the gas in that respective gear, this is what happens. So it's going to change depending on what gear you're in. That's why, again, specifics don't really matter, and that's why you're not going to see, max torque at 1,500 RPM, because that's not the test condition. So this is basically what happens in a real-world scenario if you're in 4th gear in an F80, 5th gear in the E92, and you stomp the throttle. And look at the torque! I mean, the difference is just... It's comical, and this is why I say that the specific numbers don't matter, because you can just tell looking at the shape how much torque you have and how quickly it comes in and how consistent it remains. I don't remember if this is the best run that we got out of both cars, but the shape of the curve was essentially identical in every single condition that we dynoed it. And when I talk about the linearity of the E92 M3, this is what I mean. You just have this consistent torque delivery and this really predictable increase in power. This shove of torque and this horsepower is just so constant. This thing pulls so hard, and there's no better example of it than right here. Yeah. Anyway, so that's rounding out all that stuff. I wonder if I'm missing anything before we wrap this up. Let me check all my notes here. As I mentioned, always, if you have any questions on this stuff, hit me up on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm across all of them, YouTube, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about these cars. I will say this, with the options, the way they've handled the M3 options, I'm kind of bummed out by. Basically, they've grouped all the most popular options into one executive package that costs $4,300. And that's kind of a bummer because I like things like keyless access and a heads-up display, but I don't necessarily want leather. BMW told me that if you want cloth and you want the executive package, things in the executive package, they'll do that on a case-by-case basis. But the executive package also adds things that I don't really want, so I'm kind of bummed that you can't spec these cars like you can a 911, because these cars, to me at least, and I don't know because I'm not speaking on behalf of all buyers, and I'm also not a product planner, so I could be way off base here. I mean, there are people who do this stuff for a living who know their markets really well, so I could be completely wrong here. But just to voice my own opinion, I want to option this car to tailor it to my taste, regardless of what that cost is. Like I mentioned, I want cloth seats. I would like to be manually adjustable. I don't care about high, xenon or HID headlights or whatever, but I do want a heads-up display. And, I want fixed dampers, but I also want keyless access. So I really wish I could pick and choose these options a la carte. Unfortunately, you can't do that, which is kind of a bummer. But that's just the way it is, and maybe they'll change that around in a couple years, but maybe not. Again, I could be totally wrong here. I think the logic there is that the options that they've grouped into this package are the options that people most typically buy. So it makes sense from that perspective. It's still like, I'm not going to buy this car, so again, this argument is completely unnecessary. What I can't really do enough is just stress how fun this car is. Despite the engine not sounding particularly great from the inside, the chassis is so well balanced and so much fun. This definitely is the best handling M3 we've had in the U.S. It's just I kind of would like to have the V8 in this chassis. That's impossible. I'll happily take the power this Turbo 6 makes, because it is, in terms of, look at that old graph that I showed earlier, like, you can't argue with that kind of power increase. The car itself is a ton of fun. It's an absolute delight to drive in terms of handling. Yeah, I think that's gonna do it. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope to do this again with the next awesome fun car I drive. So until then, see you next time.